Before, oh, there we go, that recording, little announcement. Um, Before we dive into today's lesson, I wanted to just share a little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Prerna Singh, and I like to joke that my journey with customer discovery kicked off when I was 10. I was obsessed with making the perfect cup of Indian chai. I don't know if any of you have had it, but it is amazing. It's delicious. Highly recommend. And I wanted to get it right for my friends and family, but it was always kind of like this, I don't know, hit or miss affair. So one afternoon after school, my friends came over for what I called the ultimate chai challenge. What I ended up doing, I brewed up like 5 different versions of my chai with different proportions of ingredients and had all my friends do a blind taste test and fill out a survey with what they like the best. That feedback helped me figure out what the right mix of tea and water and milk and ginger and cardamom and all the fun flavors you can put in tea. Turns out that's still my go-to recipe today. But why I really share that story is because young Prerna had learned a really important lesson that day. It wasn't about what I liked in my chai. It was about what all my friends wanted in their cup. And that changed everything for me. I've brought customer research and discovery as a skill set to each of my roles in product to really help unlock powerful insights that drive meaningful experiences and drive business growth. Whether it was scaling a business 20x when I was the VP of product at an early stage startup called Coedition, or helping navigate the challenges of an in-person business during COVID in my most recent role as VP of product and design at Meetup. Through these really hard moments and shifting business contexts, shifting environments, I've relied on one constant, and that is focusing on what the user needs. So today, what I want to spend our time together talking about is sharing with you what customer discovery is, why we do it, and what my take is on different kinds of customer discovery that you can perform. Throughout this presentation, I want to keep it fun and interactive. There will be a few moments where I'll ask you to jot your answers down in the chat. And of course, if you have questions at any time, please don't hesitate to drop those as well. So to kick us off, this is going to be one of those fun and interactive moments. I like to have everyone put in a guess in the chat for what they think all of these products that you see on the screen, what they have in common. And maybe I'll give everyone like 30 seconds or so to figure it out. Okay, we've got one response, two now. All right. Green lights, but failures on launch. Steven says aluminum. Any other responses from the audience? All right. Well, common users. Okay. Well, I think actually Anne is probably the closest. They all failed. Um, and the reason that they failed is because each of these products didn't really go deep in understanding what their customers needed. Or in the case where a prior product already existed, like Coke, really underestimating the emotional connection customers already had with the original formula so much that they shun this idea of a new Coke. And if anyone knows the actual story of new Coke, they like customers were so pissed off about the idea that a new formula had kind of come to be that they filed lawsuits against the company for changing the iconic drink. So for it depends on what could happen. People could boycott your product or even file lawsuits if you get it wrong. Of course, it's easy to talk about big brands that fail. Those are probably the stories that we remember the most. But according to an HBS study, every year, over 30,000 new products are introduced, and 95% of them fail. That's a crazy failure rate. And honestly, I'm not surprised. And I'm sure many of us have probably experienced it at least once in our product careers too. I know I have certainly done so on more than one occasion. So, what are we going to do? Like, are we all just destined to be total failures? Good thing for you all, you're all here, and it might be other people's fates, but it will not be yours because we're going to talk about how to actually overcome this. Enter customer discovery, which I like to think about as where the scientific method meets social psychology. When it's performed correctly, customer discovery is an incredibly powerful methodology and really a mindset that focuses on understanding the needs, desires, and frustrations of a target customer base, and then finding the best ways to solve them. This is super critical to making sure that we aren't building something that no one wants, or worse, building something that we think people want based on our own biases. Customer discovery takes the bias out of the equation, ultimately allowing us to build products and businesses that are successful. Now, the question is, how do we actually conduct customer discovery? So, next interactive portion of our chat today, I want to take 30 seconds, and I want everyone to jot down in chat up to 3 words what they think customer discovery is. It could be 3 words as a phrase or 3 independent words, whatever you guys want to do. But I want you to describe customer discovery in 3 words, and I'll give everyone maybe another 30 seconds or so. Okay. Some fun responses coming in. Kyle says research. John says reducing risk failure. Madeline says understanding customer needs. Steven says problem, empathy, conversation, talking to customers. And market potential and listening. I like that. Understanding pain points from Louisa Marie. Okay. Some great responses. The common conception, while not wrong, is that customer discovery is this idea of finding people to talk to, asking them a bunch of questions, and then leveraging that for insights. And that's usually what people think. And I think a lot of you kind of shared insights along those lines. But in today's lesson, I want to expand that worldview. From my years doing customer discovery and research with many different teams, I've come to the conclusion that there are so many sources of information that we can use to learn and understand our customer better. Some sources of information we can get directly by reaching out to our customers. And some sources of data are readily available because the customer is actively engaging with our products and giving us that information real time. It's up to us then to figure out what sources of data we have and how to consolidate all of these sources of truth to creating and telling a compelling narrative of what our customers need. So what do I mean by this? I want to talk through the 4 different types of customer feedback that I have classified in this manner. And what I'm trying to really do here is expand, again, what we think of the sort of traditional customer feedback, which is going and interviewing customers. And it's just not just interviews and surveys that you and your team might conduct, but thinking more broadly about the different kinds of feedback that exist. Today, we're going to explore how you can leverage feedback beyond just like the direct type of customer feedback, and thinking about indirect, inferred, and intervention methods of feedback as well. And I'll go through each of these in more detail in the next few slides. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. Again, like I said, I'd like to keep this interactive. So if you have a question about any of these methods or anything that I'm talking about, feel free to sort of jump in. So the first type of feedback method is probably the one that most people are familiar with and what they associate customer discovery with, which is what I like to call direct feedback. Direct feedback is what customers say to you directly when you prompt them. This can take many forms, but some really popular examples of direct feedback come in the form of surveys, NPS scores, in-app ratings, or even contextual interviews that you might conduct with a customer, either moderated or unmoderated. Now, the pros of doing this kind of research are abundantly clear. You are hearing from the customer herself. The other benefit is that you can get really targeted information. You don't have to go on this crazy hunting expedition for relevant information because you're asking the questions you need answers to. When I was at Coedition, building a marketplace for plus size women's fashion, we actually went to our customers' homes to understand how our customers likes to shop and learn a lot more about her preferences while she was in kind of her in her house and the spaces where she liked to get dressed. This gave us a really deep understanding of how and when she likes to shop, leading us to really create a better shopping experience on our site. Now, for the downside, it can be really costly to set up. The overhead admin can take up time, especially if you're bringing people in to talk to. You have to not only figure out who you want to talk to, but once you do, you have to figure out how to reach out to these people, schedule them, take the time to talk to them. For things like surveys, there's numerous tools out there that make it relatively easy to set up, but there's still some fixed costs to actually um, getting these kinds of surveys set up. There's also fatigue that you have to deal with. Customers' time is incredibly precious, and it can be really easy to cross into survey fatigue or just a general lack of desire from your customers to want to engage in customer research studies if you're doing them too frequently. And then lastly, another kind of downside that could take place is that you might get some biased responses because sometimes the responses you're getting are coming out of context. So what I mean by this is if you're not actually going into someone's home, right, and you're bringing them into a different environment like your office or even asking them in a survey, you know, what to talk about a time that they experienced something, you're asking people questions of how they might act in a situation or explain how they've acted in the past. And those kinds of responses can have very natural biases, right? You're not actually doing the job, or you're not actually observing someone do the job. You're asking them to recall what they did. And so that recall comes with its own inherent biases, and that those biases can sometimes like skew the analysis and what you might end up actually wanting to build. So keep that in mind that while this is a powerful tool in your customer discovery toolkit, it's not always the easiest to implement or make sense of. And so I want to deep dive into a few of these other methods that I think really help round out, our understanding of customers. The next bucket of customer feedback is what I like to call indirect feedback. This is what people or customers say about you unprompted. So what examples of this that I like to think about are website reviews, social media comments, discussion forums on Reddit, or even internal sources like customer support tickets or bug reports. All of these are incredibly rich sources of information, and they're all examples of customers engaging with your product somehow, but you didn't ask them for that feedback. At Meetup, this was a really amazing source of information for us because, first of all, we had a really passionate user base of organizers who were not afraid to tell us where we were missing the mark. In fact, we even had a group of organizers created their own discussion board. It's called Discuss Meetup. You can even find it online to talk about issues that they were having and using this external discussion board to talk about how to hack the platform for their needs. And once we found this, my team and I would actually often scour these forums for insights because of how valuable that unfiltered feedback was in real time. You might not have something like this, but if you don't, consider maybe even setting up a community for your users, because there's so much that you can learn from users engaging with other users as well. And then plus it's a great forum for users to have and communicate with other folks that might be experiencing the same problem. The pros of this method, unlike direct feedback, it really doesn't cost any time to set up, especially if some of those sources are external, like a social media platform or external review sites like Google or Trustpilot. It's also a really great method to overcome the cold start problem. If you don't have any product or you don't have any customers, you might be wondering, okay, well, where do I get started on customer discovery? The really nice thing about indirect feedback is that a lot of that information can be accessed publicly, and you can look up what people are saying about maybe your perceived competitors or established businesses in the space if you're looking to get started. And it can allow you to gauge what the white space might be for a new product to enter the market without having to deeply invest into collecting customer data, like what we just talked about with the or with the direct method. Now the cons. Again, I think there's still biases that can be presented itself in the that can present itself in the data. Sometimes it's the vocal minority that speaks the loudest. And I've seen this a lot with meetup organizers. We had a Facebook group with them of over 1,000 organizers, and there were probably like a select few that were constantly posting, and often that feedback would be pretty negative. So I wouldn't base all my decisions off of what this select few folks were saying, but it was really helpful to understand, if that sentiment could be more widely shared amongst the larger organizer population. And in some cases, I found that the feedback was extremely localized to a very specific set of users and generally didn't apply to that wider user base. And then my teams and I would, treat that feedback accordingly and not maybe give it as much priority as some of the more far-reaching impact type issues. And the other thing I want to mention on this also is that there's it's hard to take this feedback and extend it to thinking about what your product might need, not today, but tomorrow, right? So you might hear what's wrong with your product today, but less about what your customers need from you tomorrow. And as opposed to direct feedback, where you can actually talk to users and present them future ideas and discuss the merits of, any future feature that you might want to release, you don't really get the chance to do so here, right? People are just voluntarily giving you this information unprompted. So the challenge definitely here is you have to tread carefully and make sure that you're considering the feedback in the context with which it's being given, and maybe have to use other methods to support your analysis and insights, especially if you're trying to figure out what to build in the future. The third bucket of customer feedback I like to call is what I like to call inferred. This is pretty straightforward. This is any information that you can derive from the data that you're collecting about your customer as they're using your product. This can really help us understand behaviors of what people are or are not doing when they're interacting with your product and how they may or may not be converting. This is a really powerful tool, especially when you're in the early stages of customer discovery. At Coedition, we actually established a pattern of consistently looking at our funnel metrics, and this allowed us to uncover pretty substantial problems in our funnel. And we had a major checkout problem that, by having this like very consistent method of looking at, our behavioral data from our users, we were able to identify. One of the downsides, though, of this collection method is that it very rarely tells you why something is happening. And that's what happened at Coedition. We knew we had a really high cart abandon rate, but we just didn't know why. So it actually took a combination of some of these methods to understand the why. But the inferred method is actually very powerful as even just kind of a initial discovery tool of where what's happening and helping you kind of pinpoint where to focus on. So don't underestimate the power of looking at the data and using it to either identify problems or gut check what you think might be a problem. And lastly, this might be one of my favorite types of customer feedback, is what I like to call the intervention method. This is information you can collect by intervening right at the point in time when the customer is experiencing a friction in your product. I was talking about that example at Codition where we had that checkout problem. So I want to go back to that. We knew we had a high cart abandon problem, but we didn't know why. So in an effort to understand what was going on, I staged what I like to call an intervention, which is that if a customer dropped in the middle of checkout, I sent her an email from my email account, right? We didn't have any fancy cart abandon email. It was just straight from my Coedition email account. And I would ask her why she dropped and if there was anything that we could do to help her make her purchase. To my complete surprise, I would get several responses back daily. And all of these responses, once I started getting enough of them, I started seeing a theme. And it turns out that we actually had a whole host of operational issues, especially around like expedited shipping and delivery dates and whatnot. So all of that actually helped us understand like what our top company priorities should be. And over the course of my time there, where like a few quarters, we spent time actually focusing on optimizing some of those operational processes, and we helped increase conversion by over 20%. So don't underestimate, how valuable it is to be able to get customers to tell you why as soon as they experience a problem. The closer you can get that information to when they experience that friction, the more rich that data and information will be. So if you're trying to figure out why something is happening, I highly encourage you to take a look at this method. It's an excellent method in a pretty scrappy way to get information pretty quickly and to be able to make quicker decisions. All of this to say, as you engage on your customer discovery journey with your product, there is no one right method. But I hope today kind of expanded your worldview and opened doors for different opportunities to conduct discovery with your customers. And honestly, just get creative with how you can improve your understanding of them. If you're eager to learn more, as Madeline mentioned at the top of this conversation, I am teaching a 6-week customer research and discovery course. We go into much, much more detail and in-depth, talking about examples, presenting case studies and whatnot, and you get a chance to actually run your own customer discovery project. So definitely check out Gigantic and check out my course, which starts in a few weeks. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that came up. I'll open up chat. See if there was anything here.
Yes, thank you so much, Prerna. We do have a question from Anne Ray. Do you have any recommendations of AI tools for handling indirect feedback? Problem is massive amounts of data there.
Yeah, that's a great question, Anne. I don't have anything off of the top of my head. I will look into this for you. I think there are like lots of different customer sorry, like I think the customer data platforms, other CDPs that are starting to actually integrate AI within their tools, like things like mixed panel and whatnot. So I know a lot of those kinds of tools that are out there are using AI itself to start surfacing that, but I don't know of any tools that you can maybe plug into directly with your data and offer insights. So I think the best bet right now is if you're using things like, I know like Full Story is doing some stuff, and any of these like CDPs, that a lot of them are dabbling into features that allow you to highlight insights.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be a solution that is created very quickly. I'd love to, does anyone else have any other questions? Feel free to ask them, put yourselves off mute and ask them sort of face to face or put them in the chat. If I may, I was curious. I loved your example that you gave on intervention. Do you have any other examples, say when you were at Meetup or whatnot, that of different customer research that you found worked really well, and maybe ones that didn't work so well?
Yeah, so many examples. Um I'll talk about one at Meetup that I thoroughly enjoyed doing, and it really helped us, not just build a feature that people loved, but actually had like real business impact as well, because it opened up an entirely new like revenue stream for us. Um, Basically, essentially what was happening is that obviously with COVID kind of coming in to threaten our in-person business, we really had to figure out how to like pivot our business and make sure that people were still using it, using Meetup, even though they couldn't meet in person. So we introduced online events. And what became very interesting, after again, we were looking at the data very closely to kind of see, who was hosting online events, how are they hosting it. We noticed a really interesting thing happening in our data. We had we saw organizers, especially those that had multiple groups, hosting the same online event, like creating like six or seven um duplicates of the same online event. And at first we were like, wait, like is something happening in our back end where these like events are getting duplicated somewhat like randomly? And actually upon like further research, once we kind of dug into that uh to like all of that the data that we had, what we noticed is actually no, they all looked the same, like the same event, but they were all being hosted in different locations. And what we realized is that like with online events, um, people actually had didn't have to, be in a specific location, right? You can join a Zoom from wherever. And so what we saw, like all of our organizers doing who had groups in multiple location, was they were being forced to create events, the same event in each of their groups. Like there wasn't one single online event that they could promote to all of the groups that they had. So anyways, that's all the background and story. And the reason why I bring this up is because at first our gut instinct to like figure like to solve this problem was, okay, well, let's just like make a copy and paste feature, right? Like make it super easy to duplicate and then just like, change the location. But what we realized is actually like that wasn't really going to be it seemed a little bit too simple, honestly. And so what we did is we used an intervention method there. And what we ended up doing was we actually put up a form on our website, and we said, hey, if you're looking to like host an online event for, any for your like 20 or more groups, like let us know, fill out this form, we will take care of it for you. And basically we ended up taking on the job of creating these events and having to like post them in all of these different groups, and that gave us a lot of empathy for the problem. Realized actually copying and pasting was like the worst solution we could have built. And I won't go into all the details of why that was such a bad idea, but ended up being a really bad idea. And we were able to build something internally that allowed it easy, like made it a lot easier for us to post those events to all of the different groups. And then once we felt really confident that we had a solution that solved our organizers' needs, we actually just turned that into a front-facing admin feature. And so there's a real benefit in the ways that you can do the interventions. This particular intervention that we kind of staged, I like to think of it as like we took the job on ourselves, and that allowed us to build a lot more empathy for the user. But yeah, there's been times where also, our user research we haven't quite gotten it right either, which I'm happy to go into if there are any other questions.
Thank you. So we do have a question from Don, who is curious, when building a new solution add-on to an existing product a customer uses, what are the differences in a customer's assessment protocol?
Um, hold on, when is it bundling or building? When bundling a new
Oh,
solution, an existing product, what are the
Can I
differences?
interject?
Yeah, Don, I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Okay. So we're building a new solution,
Okay.
and that new solution, we are going to be partnering with um, other companies where our target audience has their solution. The
Okay.
product that we're building is independent of the current product that they're using, but will enhance the current product that they're using.
Got it.
So while they're while they would coexist and have a significant amount of interoperability, they are two independent solutions. And I was wondering how much of their current product, which they like, and their love for their current product would influence the introduction of a new product that's highly integrated and highly um, enhances their existing product, even though it's not being sold by the original company, but it is endorsed.
I see. Okay.
So I'm looking at what the assessment process is, acceptance, do you bypass typical capital purchase reviews and positioning as an add-on or a complement, more of an add-on, like a very huge add-on feature to an existing implementation.
Right. Right. Okay. Without knowing like all of the details
Yeah, yeah, of
of
course.
all of it, I guess what I'm curious about, like, have you had a chance to put this in front of users and in terms of like thinking about it as like either an add-on or like what kind of testing have you done so far?
Oh, we surveyed users. We presented wireframes as to how it would work. We
What was the response?
um, the first year and a half, extremely poor how we tested it.
Mm,
And then we discovered new approaches. And then the last 3 or 4 months was a big wow.
fascinating. And what changed? What was the difference in the insight that sort of materially changed the experience?
A combination of education of what we would be able to eliminate what they currently do. And we dramatically improved the cost benefit explanations, and we fine tuned the application. So a lot of it was about education and understanding, changing habits of years to doing something else. And so the challenge we have is educating a community effectively and or cost effectively about changing their behavior to
Yeah,
accept a product that would make things way better for them.
totally.
So there are perception issues and, how do you streamline the education process? Um, and how do you get acceptance of that?
When you say acceptance, you mean adoption.
Adoption, yes,
Yeah. Okay.
that's
Understood.
correct.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that there's definitely from just how you're talking about it, definitely areas I would say to tap in if you have a product marketing team to definitely tap into that and especially if it's like a lot of messaging that might need to happen not just when someone arrives to that particular part, but like even before that to start talking about the value prop of this add-on that you are building. But I think it always like for me kind of comes down to like, well, what is the user problem that you're solving? And it sounds like, in this particular case, it might be related to cost. And to continue to like tie your metrics to that and help kind of even highlight to potential customers like what you might be able to save them should they use your add-on as a result. And so I've seen some really clever ways of doing that and putting that directly in the UI. And that can actually like really make a difference, I think, in as far as like adoption goes. But I think you definitely play around with the messaging, and that's something that I think it sounds like that's a really great area for you to kind of continue to test and hone in on what the right messaging needs to be.
Well, it's the messaging and being able to convey that into a community that has an attention span that's extremely short.
Right. Right. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I hope that was somewhat helpful.
Oh, you did. You actually did. It confirmed what I was thinking.
Okay.
So yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Don. Okay, I think we have maybe time for one more question.
I have one more question. Stefan, do you want to speak your question out, or I could read it from the chat?
Well, I can just read my question then.
Go
So
for it.
yeah. So there's so many channels approaches to gather all sorts of data, all signals, I would say. I'm just curious to know what is the effective way to prioritize what to focus on now versus next.
Great question. I talk about this in the course.
Right.
But you know what, there's a couple different sort of methodologies that you can kind of use. But a lot of this actually comes down to a lot of pre-work that you might have done to talk. What we didn't talk about today were like anything about like hypotheses, right? And talking about what you're actually trying to learn, and what is it really trying to inform. So a lot of the exercises that I've done are very much sort of like hypothesis based. But I've used things like, I'm not sure if you've ever used like an opportunity solution tree. That's a really great way to take some of these insights. It's Teresa Torres, if you want to look her up. That's a really popular method I've used to really look through and break down problems and use the insights to say, okay, actually, this is an area that we want to maybe build a little, like build something and experiment around it, and kind of continue to thinking about it more as like, how do you continue to build a body of knowledge about your customer in a very sort of systematic fashion.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Prerna, and thank you everybody who has asked their questions and participated. And like I said, this was just a tiny, tiny snippet of what Prerna teaches in her 6 weeks customer research and discovery course, where you would get your hands dirty and do an actual customer discovery project that's personal to you and get personal feedback from your mentor that you meet with each week. So I'll send you guys the recording after this. I'll send the link to enroll in our course, which starts in a few weeks. But other than that, thank you, Prerna, and have an amazing day. Goodbye,
Thank you all.
everybody.
Bye.